Welcome to Linkronicity, where your journey and destiny link. I'm Stacey, Kumagai, your linkologist, and I'm here to help you link your life. How are you, lovely souls? I know it's been a really long time since I've done a video, right? It's been a long time. But I'm happy to be back. I was called upon the collective, not only just to come here to say thank you to all of you who responded to my retrograde acceptance blog. I was actually quite overwhelmed by the emails that I received through my website, and I want to say thank you for that. I didn't know that that particular blog was going to be kind of striking a lot of chords with a lot of different people, but I want to say thank you for being vulnerable enough to share with me what you've been going through during retrograde and give me feedback on how some of the questions prompted some things within you. That's really always helpful feedback from me. So I wanted to say thank you for all of you who came forward with that. And also return to you with kind of like this part to the blog. Because today we're going to be talking about our link of curiosity and discerning our own questioning with our higher consciousness awareness. And I thought that was a really appropriate topic to be able to share with you today, coming up on the heels of that retrograde blog about how communications change. And they change us, and then we change, and then we perceive change differently through the process. Because what's happening right now through retrograde season is we're doing a lot of reflection. And part of that is still coming off of the overwhelming surge of change that we all experienced in quarantine and during the pandemic. And we're still going through this. And I wanted to talk about it because it's hard to sort through your thoughts and feelings, as you all shared with me in your emails. It's hard to sort through all of that when you've got a foot in two separate worlds. Doesn't it feel like that? And until we describe it that way, it's hard to get through the challenge and the change unless we can identify it. And that's not to label it, because we don't like labels, but it is to explain it so we can understand it. And what happens when we understand something? When we understand something, it's easier to navigate the new terrain of what we're experiencing when we kind of grasp our own concepts of what that actually means for each of us. Because it's going to be different, because we're all on these alternative different timelines. And as you know from 2019, in those earlier blogs when I channeled what was going to be happening to us, we talked about going to the next level, rising with our own higher consciousness awareness, and everyone who's on a different level was rising to the next level. But that doesn't mean we're all at the same place, because our journeys are all different experiences, and we're experiencing different things at different times. And so since we're all collectively feeling like we're on a different timeline, because we are, what we have now in front of us in the human experience is a foot in two worlds. A foot in the world that we knew pre-pandemic, and a foot in the world that we're experiencing now in the present as we try to figure out how this is going to look when we turn the corner in this pandemic, and how to merge the two worlds with our collective experience of what we know and our own awareness of what we know, and how that affects our communication. So we're going to talk about this today. There's no homework, there's no exercise, but I am going to be asking you some questions to think about so you can do your own processing, for whatever that means for you of wherever you are on your alternate timeline. So let's talk about curiosity. Why is curiosity so important? Curiosity is a child, meant using our imagination, being creative, visualizing, right? We had a sense of wonder. We had a sense of exploring the world through new eyes. Well, guess what, people? Since we've been through the pandemic, we're actually also going back to that place, but while we're adulting. It's complicated, right? It's complicated. It's complicated because what's familiar to us is that childhood sense of curiosity, questioning, why, how come, imagination, problem solving in a different way, not always accepting things for as they are, as in a permanency, but as in what can we do to create? What can we do to make change? What can we do to make things better? How can we change our story, right? To look differently rather than being in this box. Because we don't have the box anymore. Regardless of wherever you are on your journey as to what comfort zones you've jumped out of. And let me tell you, there's been a lot of them, right? Because no one's in their comfort zone anymore. Not in the old way, not in the same way. We've all had to adapt. We've all had to change. We have all had to be more aware of how we're showing up in the world. We've had to be more aware of health and safety. We've had to be more aware of how we're relating to others, how we're keeping other people safe. All of these things, right? That's change. But what happens when that happens is our brains start to process information a little bit differently. So what happens when that happens? How we communicate also gets affected, because we may be using old ways of communicating that don't work anymore. We may even more in turn use old ways of relating that don't work anymore, because we're not the same people. And we cannot assume that everyone has stood still, right? Our status quo lives that we had, whatever they were pre-pandemic, have now shifted. What have we experienced in this shift? What have you experienced in this shift? In terms of how you identified status quo, how you identified your absolute, as in, this is me and this is how I communicate, this is how I relate. How have you identified this form of communication is effective? Think about that for a second. Because maybe it's not. Maybe it's not anymore. Because as your world changes around you, and as all of the rest of humanity changes around you, and the world changes, right? The world is changing, regardless of whatever progress we are seeing or we are not seeing on a very conscious level. In our subconscious, in our higher consciousness, things are moving. Like a lot of little pistons in an engine, right? It's like a lot of different cylinders operating at the same time, different ways. So that's not to say that we've entered a new phase completely. We're still ourselves in some aspect, but we are changed selves. And when we've changed, we cannot assume that whatever we're saying and doing is being received the same way, being perceived the same way, being processed the same way, or comprehended the same way. Yeah. So as we're thinking about that, receiving and perceiving, and going through all of that, ask yourself the curiosity question, if you're curious enough to ask it. How have you changed in receiving communications? Let's start with that. Now, this can mean a lot of things. This can mean maybe you're not tolerating texts anymore because you'd really rather be talking to somebody on the phone or video chat or whatever. Maybe that's your method of communication that has changed. On a professional level, maybe as a consumer, you've even changed. You're unsubscribing to emails, solicitations that you used to support and now you don't, because you're not that same person anymore. You're more discerning with your choices as a consumer, how you're creating the choice relationships that you're having in your life with what you're being sold, what you buy, what you choose to spend your money on, which causes you choose to support. Is there a bigger picture perspective to that? If you're in business and your job is to market or sell or advertise or produce something. Your communications in that whole process is changing as well, right? You have to problem solve more. You have to come up with greater solutions. You have to ask more questions because your audience may have changed. Maybe your market's changed. Maybe your whole company's changed that you worked for. You know, maybe there are a lot of people who are now gone, or people who have moved on, or people who are new people who've come in who need to learn. And how are you identifying with that process? So how we receive is really an interesting thing. And then how we perceive also goes hand in hand with that, as to how we're relating and communicating with one another. And so following on the heels of that blog that I wrote about acceptance in retrograde. When retrograde is a delay, when retrograde is made for a purposeful delay, how are you using that time? How are you using that time to regroup, reflect, perhaps even explore with that curiosity line of questioning how you want to move forward? What do you want it to look like? What types of things are you going to say now that you didn't say before? What kinds of things are you not going to say now that maybe you used to go off and say before? And how does that relate to your truth? Your changed, evolutionary, progressive truth. Who you've become during this quarantine time. It's important right now, people. It's important. Quarantine. People look at quarantine in a lot of different ways. People who look at it from the negative light of, oh, I've lost certain freedoms. Actually, no, you've actually gained more freedoms in quarantine than you realize, because you had the opportunity to really think about things, slow down life a little bit, to really think about things of purposeful steps, clarified communications, mission-centric steps, authenticity, transparency, speaking your mind, your truth, your heart, your soul, whatever, right? We reflected on a lot, because as things were happening around us, and a lot of people were dying, tragically, sadly, we began to question what's going on, who are we in the process, what are we going to do about certain things, how are we going to create the change in certain things, and how are we going to relate and communicate while this change is going on. So this is where we return to that curiosity. But we return to the curiosity point of questioning our communication now with new eyes, with a new lens. Almost like that child that I talked about before, the childhood curiosity and questioning, when we used to be a little kid and we used to ask, well, why? Well, how come? Well, when? Well, where? Right? That whole natural thing that we have. Now as we're adulting, how can we take that now into our adult life and use it that way, with that same intentional set of eyes, to look at it that way, as opposed to the negative way, which doesn't work for any of us. Instead of worrying, we know that's useless, right? Worrying is useless because it doesn't make anything different. It just doesn't. So how are we going to use that now? That same childhood energy with our adulting, higher consciousness, spiritual evolutionary wisdom, and put the two together to navigate our new normal. How are we going to do that? How are you going to do that? In the context of your truth, your trust, your conviction, your belief system, which has changed. Trust me, it has. It has. How could it not? Anybody who's gone through this entire pandemic unaffected I don't believe that exists. I think you've been changed somehow, in some way, hopefully for the better, right? But I know that it's also reared its ugly head and shown you a lot of things you didn't want to look at because you had a lot of time to think. You had a lot of time to reflect. You had a lot of time to feel through things. Some things weren't pleasant. And some things reignited your hope and faith and trust and belief in humanity too, with the good things you saw. The things you didn't expect. The things that you didn't think you'd ever see in your lifetime in a positive light of people stepping up. People taking accountability and responsibility that they didn't before. And getting beyond just the human stuff. Getting into the soul space. The soul space of what matters. That's how we use that. That's how we use what we came off the blog of my retrograde acceptance blog. That's how we take that over here into now the curiosity questioning here, and we go bam. Let's put the two together and make it productive, useful, efficient, mutually beneficial, respectful, and purposeful to make our lives better, to help our communications improve with whatever it is that we're saying. But let's make it matter more. You know, words can just be words, right? They can have meaning or not, depending on what you apply to them or not, or what others choose to perceive with them or not. But at the end of the day, it goes beyond just the words. It goes into the heart space, and it goes into the soul space, because when we're all gone, that's all that's really going to matter anyway. So why don't we take this time now to pull back just a bit and see, how has it affected you? What positive change are you going to make from it? How can you improve from this foot in the old life to the foot in the new life? How can you slowly come together and put the pieces together now to make that work for your positive life force energy and help raise your vibration, so we can raise the consciousness of humanity into a higher vibration, so we can be more proactive in how we create solutions rather than whining about problems. Let's work with that energy now in a new space, in a new way, so we all can collectively live our very best life for the highest and greatest good. I'm Stacey, Kumagai, your Linkologist, here to help you link your life. Be sure to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Linkronicity, blogspot.com, or you can go to Linkronicity.com for private coaching sessions. I still have them available. I also welcome your questions there, and I look forward to seeing what happens as we start to inch forward into our new alternate timeline together, and hoping we can create better relating across the board with our newly evolved selves. So have a wonderful, beautiful day. Thank you for being here. I have gratitude from my heart. Be gentle with yourself, be gentle with others, and have a very beautiful, blessed day. Namaste.